my name is Sarah and today I'm here to share my April-ish wrap-up. April-ish because since I am shifting back from the recent read 5-book wrap-ups into a monthly wrap-up again, there are 2 books from the month of March that I did not get a chance to wrap up yet. So in addition to the books from the month of April, I will be wrapping up those as well. Overall, April was an okay-ish reading month. It was kind of slumpy as far as the quantity of books that I read. I think just coming out of the craziness of February and March, I was just exhausted and we were still getting the house together and working on projects and all of that, and I was trying to catch up on sleep and catch up on life and all of these things, and so I just didn't have quite as much time to read as I would have liked to. But as far as quality of books is concerned, it was a pretty solid month. Before we jump into the books themselves, I'm going to share a few statistics with you. Over the month of April, I read a grand total of 4 books for a combined 1,341 pages with an average page number of 335 per book. 75% of those books were new reads, and 25% of them were rereads. 50% were fantasy, 25% were historical fiction, and 25% were classics. 25% of them were for an adult audience, 25% were for a young adult audience, and 50% were for a children's or middle grade audience. As far as diversity is concerned, 25% of them had no diversity represented, 50% had ethnic diversity represented, and 25% had disability diversity represented. Unfortunately, however, none of that diversity was represented in the protagonist of those 4 novels. As far as location is concerned, 50% of them took place in a fantasy setting, 25% took place in Canada, and 25% took place in France. 25% of the books were written by male authors, and 75% of them were written by female authors. 25% were written in or before the 1920s, 25% were written in the 2000s, and 50% of them were written between 2010 and 2015. When it comes to star ratings, I had 1 3.5 star book, 2 4.5 star books, and 1 5-star book for an average star rating of 4.38. So like I said, it was not a great month as far as quantity of books, but it was a pretty solid one as far as quality is concerned. Now let us jump into the wrap-up, starting with the last 2 books from the month of March. Book number 21 for the year being Quest for Love by Elisabeth Elliott. The subtitle for this book is True Stories of Passion and Purity, and so it's in many respects a follow-up to her book Passion and Purity. She shares a lot of true stories of how different people got together into romantic relationships and uses those as jumping off points for discussing different scenarios. In general, I just found this book a lot less compelling than Passion and Purity, and I think part of that is because a lot of the stories that she shares are from the 1800s and early 1900s, when just how people met and interacted in general was very different than how we meet and interact now. And so a lot of the stories are from missionaries in the 1800s who went to China and knew of this one person who was also going to China and met this one time, proposed by letters, and it was a lot of the situations were just so vastly different and unrelatable, I guess, to the situations that we are in this modern era, and so there just wasn't that kind of same connection to them, and I didn't necessarily find any of them particularly relatable or as compelling, so I wound up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine overall, just nothing particularly great about it. The final book for March, book number 22 for the year, was Stars Above by Marissa Meyer. This is in many respects the final installment to the Lunar Chronicles, which is a young adult sci-fi series that is retellings of popular fairy tales. And so this is a collection of 9 novellas, mostly that take place either before or during the events of the Lunar Chronicles series. There is also 1 short story that has nothing to do with any of the characters really in the rest of the Lunar Chronicles series, but it is still really fun. And then there is 1 short story that takes place after the events of the series. I wound up giving this collection as a whole 4 stars, which is an average of the individual ratings that I gave the individual stories. It was just really, really fun to see how they were shaped into the characters that they are before we actually got to meet them, to see more of Cress's backstory and Thorne's backstory and Winter and Jason and Cinder, and just a lot of really fun things that as a fan of the series I really, really appreciated. And then of course the final story that takes place after is just completely squee-worthy and made me so happy. Of the 9 novellas, my 2 favorite were by far The Princess and the Guard and Something Old, Something New. If you are a fan of this series, then you definitely should check it out. But if you have not actually read the Lunar Chronicles series, I'm going to link in the card symbol above and in the description below to a video that Trina from Between Chapters did, where she recommends the reading order for the Lunar Chronicles that sort of weaves these stories into how they fit in the rest of the series so that you aren't spoiled for anything but can get better context for stuff, and I will link that below, and if you are interested in reading the series, you should definitely check it out. And now onto the books for April. The first book in April and book 23 for the year was The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne M. Valente. This is the first book in a 5-book middle grade series called the Fairyland series. It came very highly recommended by Mari from the channel My Name is Mari Ness, and it certainly did not disappoint. Catherynne Valente's writing style is very whimsical and kind of weird when you first encounter it, but once you get into the first couple of chapters, it just starts to flow, and I absolutely adored it. I loved the way that the narration was set up and the commentary that the narrator gave on the story as a whole. It just added a really fun element to the story. I really appreciated the character development, and I just really appreciated the complexity of this world that she created, but she did it in such a subtle and fascinating way, and I loved the character of September, who is our heroine and goes on her journey to Fairyland. I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The last couple chapters in particular just really sort of tugged at your heart and just pulled you into the story, and I'm really excited to continue with the rest of the series in the very near future. Up next, book number 24 for the year was Anne's House of Dreams by L.M. Montgomery. This is the 5th book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and we start with Anne and Gilbert finally getting married after all of the years of just sort of wishing and waiting and hoping for Gilbert and Anne, and they're finally together, and then they move across the island so that Gilbert can start his practice and start their life together. As a result of their new location, you encounter an entirely new cast of characters, but they are just as fascinating and vivacious as the characters that you meet in the first 4 books in the series, and of course you still have Anne and her just wit and humor and vivacious, precocious, wonderful personality, and I love seeing the continued development of the relationship between her and Gilbert. We really get to see them interact a lot more, and you just see how much they care for each other, and there are just some really sweet lines in here, in particular about Gilbert and how much he loves Anne and how much he cares for her, and I love L.M. Montgomery's writing style, and I love this series. I love Anne. I love Gilbert. I love all of the things about it. I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. Up next, book number 25 for the year was Blackwater by DJ McHale. This is the 5th book in the Pendragon series, which is a YA fantasy series. So I very much had a love-hate relationship with this book throughout the entirety of it. On the one hand, the story was a lot more compelling. It was a lot more interesting. There's a lot more things that are starting to happen the further and further we get into this series. However, I really struggled with Bobby as a protagonist in this particular book. He just seemed even more whiny than he has in some of the previous books, which is kind of frustrating because you would think that as he's getting older and getting more used to this and getting more mature, he would be getting less whiny, but this book, he just completely rubbed me the wrong way and drove me absolutely crazy for most of the book, and I spent a lot of that book just rolling my eyes at him and being like, shut up dude, you're just being ridiculous about this, and stop. I wound up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I will be continuing with the series and hoping and praying that he gets less irritating. And my final book for the month of April, book number 26 for the year, was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a World War II historical fiction novel about 2 sisters living in Nazi-occupied France during the war, and about their parallel stories and the different paths that they take, as one sister goes to join the French resistance and the other one chooses to remain in her home in a town that is occupied by the Nazis and then has a Nazi billeted there. I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I stayed up until 2 a.m. to finish it on May 1st because I was just so sucked into the story. It was so beautifully written. The characters and their development was so rich and fascinating, and I just absolutely fell in love with them and was so taken and captivated by their life and the things that they were experiencing. It was an absolutely exquisite novel. I cried a lot throughout the story because, as you can imagine, it's World War II, and so they both experience a lot of heartbreaking things throughout their time in the war, and it's a fantastic story that I'm sure I will be coming back to again and again and again. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, loved everything about it, and I will be doing a more extensive video review on this in the coming weeks, so be on the lookout for that if you would like to hear more thoughts. As far as my current reads are concerned, I am in the middle of The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis, which is a collection of various speeches and essays that he did on a bunch of different topics, one of which being titled The Weight of Glory. I have also recently started A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is my next Pulitzer Prize pick, and I have also picked up Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series, which if you watched my videos from last year, you probably know that I read Throne of Glass, and I did not enjoy it really at all, but you guys encouraged me to continue with the series, give it at least to the second book before I made a decision as to whether or not I would DNF it. So I've had this out from the library for a while. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully for her sake it's 3rd time's a charm, but it might be 3 strikes and you're out. Well, there you have it, friends. That is my April-ish wrap-up. If you have read any of the books, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments below. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Sarah Ann Hayes. The links for those profiles will also be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!